She was raised to hate white men. Then a dying cowboy fell at her feet. From a young age, her life was shaped by the stories, warnings, and beliefs of her parents and elders. Her parents had lived through difficult times and had built walls around their hearts. They often spoke about people they believed could not be trusted, especially white men, and they told Aisha stories that painted the outside world as dangerous and unfair. Every story, every warning became a lesson. "Always be careful," her mother would say. "Never trust strangers, especially those who are different from us." Her father would nod seriously and add, "The world is not kind and people will take advantage if you are too trusting." Aisha listened. She didn't fully understand everything at first, but over time the lessons sank in. She learned to watch people carefully, to notice the way they moved, the tone of their voices, and the little hints that might signal danger. She became careful with her words and her actions, always trying to follow the rules her parents had taught her. Yet, even as a child, she noticed that not everyone was as bad as the stories said. She saw the neighbor, Mr. Khan, who was kind to everyone and always smiled, and she noticed how her school teacher treated all the students fairly, no matter where they came from. Sometimes, Aisha's heart wondered why the world her parents described didn't always match what she saw. Her village was small and life moved slowly. Children played outside from morning until dusk, running barefoot across dusty paths, laughing and shouting. Aisha often joined them, but she always stayed a little cautious around children who were not from her immediate circle. She had learned that trust had to be earned. Even at the playground, she noticed the differences in families, in how people dressed, and in the things they said. Her parents had taught her that these differences were important and should be treated with care, or avoided altogether. School was a place of learning, but also a place where Aisha began to notice the wider world. Her teacher, Mrs. Reed, came from a city far away and had a different way of speaking and dressing. She was friendly and patient, always encouraging the children to ask questions and explore new ideas. Aisha was drawn to her lessons, fascinated by the way Mrs. Reed spoke of places Aisha had never seen and people she had never met. But at the same time, Aisha felt a little nervous around her teacher. The stories her parents had told her echoed in her mind. Could she trust this woman? Would she be safe? Even as she felt this tension, Aisha found herself learning more than just reading, writing, and numbers. She learned about courage and kindness through small acts. One day, a younger child fell while running across the dusty playground. Without thinking, Aisha ran to help him, even though he was from a family her parents often warned her about. She felt a strange warmth in her chest as she lifted him up and helped him brush off the dust. In that moment, she realized that not everything her parents said was the whole truth. There were people in the world who were kind and good, even if they were different from her family or her community. Her home life was filled with routines and lessons. Her parents often gathered her and her siblings in the evening to tell stories. Some were about family history, about struggles and survival, about hard lessons learned in a world that could be cruel. But some stories carried warnings. They spoke of strangers, of people who had hurt others, and of dangers that lurked beyond the familiar paths of the village. Aisha listened carefully, absorbing every word, because she knew that the stories carried meaning. Her parents wanted to protect her, and she could feel their love even in the strict lessons. Despite these warnings, Aisha could not help but feel curious about the world beyond her village. She would stare at the horizon, imagining what lay beyond the hills, beyond the dusty roads, beyond the fields she had walked 1,000 times. She imagined cities with tall buildings, streets filled with people, and voices speaking languages she had never heard. The world seemed large and mysterious, full of possibilities she could barely understand. And in her heart, a tiny spark of wonder began to grow, even though she also carried the heavy weight of caution and fear that her parents had instilled in her. Friendships were difficult but important. Aisha had a small group of friends from her village, and together they explored the fields and rivers nearby, climbed trees, and shared secrets. She noticed how each child had their own way of thinking, their own way of seeing the world. Some were brave, some were shy, some were kind, and some were quick to argue. In their games and conversations, Aisha began to see patterns. People could be good or bad, kind or cruel, brave or fearful, and it wasn't always easy to tell by looking at them. But her parents' teachings reminded her that some people were still more dangerous than others. She had to remember that lesson every day. As Aisha grew older, she began to question things more. She listened to the stories, but she also noticed contradictions in the world around her. There were moments when someone she had been told to fear smiled at her or helped her when she needed it. There were times when a neighbor's child shared something without expecting anything in return. These small moments confused her. She didn't want to disobey her parents, but she also began to see that the world was more complicated than she had been told. Aisha's curiosity grew stronger each year. She spent hours reading whatever books she could find, listening to stories from travelers who passed through the village, and dreaming of places she had never been. She wanted to understand people, to know the world for herself rather than just through the warnings of her parents. But she also knew that stepping beyond the boundaries of her village and her upbringing could be dangerous. Every time she thought about leaving, a small voice in her mind repeated the lessons she had learned. Be careful, don't trust strangers, the world is not safe. And so, Aisha lived in a constant balance of curiosity and caution. She was kind, thoughtful, and compassionate, but also wary. She wanted to trust people, to explore the world, to understand life beyond her village, but she could not ignore the deep-rooted beliefs she had been raised with. Every day, she learned a little more about herself, about the people around her, and about the invisible walls that her childhood had built. By the time Aisha was a teenager, the spark of curiosity had grown into a quiet determination. She wanted to see the world, to meet people, to find answers to the questions that filled her mind. But she also carried the heavy shadow of her upbringing, a shadow that told her to be careful, to keep her heart protected, and to never forget the lessons of her parents. It was a strange and often confusing feeling, one that tugged her in two directions at once, toward the unknown and toward the safety of what she already knew. Aisha's story at this stage of her life was not dramatic or filled with grand adventures. It was a story of small moments, of learning, of questioning, and of growing. It was a story of a girl who was learning to see the world beyond fear, to notice the shades of goodness and kindness that existed even in people she had been taught to distrust. It was the story of a young woman beginning to find her own path, while carrying the weight of the lessons of her past. And though Aisha did not know it yet, the world beyond her village was about to challenge her beliefs in ways she could never have imagined. A single, unexpected encounter would soon push her to confront everything she had been taught, and it would change the way she saw people, the world, and even herself. But for now, she was still learning, still observing, still carrying the heavy lessons of her childhood while quietly wondering what lay beyond the familiar fields and dusty roads of her village. When Aisha turned 19, she decided it was time to leave her village, at least. For a while, the narrow paths, the familiar fields, and the dusty roads had begun to feel both comforting and confining at the same time. She had dreams she could not ignore, the desire to see more of the world, to meet people different from her own, and to understand life beyond the stories she had grown up with. Her parents were hesitant. They warned her about the dangers of leaving, about strangers, about the unknown, but they also saw the determination in her eyes. They could not stop her from walking a path she had chosen for herself. Aisha found work in a small rural town, far from her village but still surrounded by wide fields and open skies. It was a town where cowboys and farmers worked hard under the sun, where horses were more common than cars, and where people valued honesty, hard work, and respect. Life here was slower than the city but busier than her village. She took a job at a small local inn, helping with cleaning, serving food, and sometimes assisting with repairs. The people she met were different from anyone she had known. They smiled freely, greeted her warmly, and often shared their own stories of life, hardship, and hope. Despite this friendly environment, Aisha felt a shadow of caution follow her wherever she went. She remembered every lesson her parents had taught her, every warning, and every story meant to keep her safe. Even when someone spoke kindly to her, she would hesitate, thinking about the possibility of hidden motives. Her heart wanted to trust, but her mind reminded her to be careful. It was an exhausting balance, walking each day in the tension between curiosity and fear. One late afternoon, after finishing her chores at the inn, Aisha decided to take a walk outside the town. She wanted a quiet moment to herself, away from the clattering of dishes, the chatter of visitors, and the endless bustle of work. She wandered down a narrow dirt trail that led toward the hills, where the sun was beginning its slow descent. The sky glowed in shades of orange and pink, and the wind carried the faint smell of wildflowers and fresh grass. It was peaceful, almost magical. Aisha felt a lightness in her chest that she had not felt in a long time. As she walked, she noticed something unusual on the side of the trail. At first, she thought it was a fallen branch or a stray bundle of clothes, but as she came closer, she realized it was a man lying on the ground. His clothes were dusty and torn, his hat lay a few feet away, and he looked as if he had been there for some time. Panic rose in her chest. She froze for a moment, remembering all the warnings she had ever received. Her first instinct was to turn away, to leave and find help. But then she heard him cough weakly, a sound filled with pain and desperation. Aisha's heart ached. She could not just leave him there. She approached cautiously, keeping a safe distance at first. The man's eyes opened slightly, and he looked at her with a mixture of fear and relief. "Help, please," he whispered. His voice was weak, but there was sincerity in it. Aisha hesitated for a long moment, her mind filled with warnings and doubts. And then, quietly, she told herself that she could not ignore someone in need. She took a deep breath and stepped closer. The man was a cowboy, older than she had first thought, with a weathered face and strong hands that now lay still from injury. His horse had apparently thrown him off, and he had fallen hard onto the rocky ground. Aisha carefully checked his injuries. His leg was twisted at an odd angle, and there were cuts and bruises on his arms and face. She knew she had to act quickly. She used her scarf to create a makeshift bandage for his wounds and carefully supported his body as she helped him sit up. She could see the pain in his eyes, and she felt a strange mixture of fear and compassion. "It's okay," she said softly, trying to calm him. "I'll get you help." The man tried to speak but could only nod weakly. Aisha realized she would have to carry him a short distance to the nearest road where she could flag down a passing vehicle. It was hard work, but she did not hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling the strength of his body and the weight of his pain. Step by step, she guided him toward safety. Along the way, the cowboy spoke in short, broken sentences. He introduced himself as Tom and mentioned that he was traveling alone. He told her that his horse had spooked, causing the fall. Aisha listened carefully, not because she doubted his words, but because speaking seemed to ease his pain. She noticed the lines of worry on his face, the sweat on his forehead, and the honesty in his voice. For the first time, she saw a human being in need, without labels or stories attached to him. By the time they reached the main road, the sun was nearly gone, and the shadows stretched long across the fields. A car was passing slowly, and Aisha waved frantically. The driver stopped and quickly called for an ambulance. While they waited, Aisha stayed with Tom, keeping him calm and talking gently. She did not ask about his background, his race, or his life. None of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was helping him survive. The ambulance arrived, and the paramedics carefully lifted Tom onto a stretcher. Aisha stepped back, feeling a strange emptiness. She had never expected the day to end this way. She had acted without thinking about the prejudices she had grown up with, without worrying about the warnings she had received since childhood. In those hours on the trail, she had been guided only by her heart. After Tom was taken away, Aisha walked home slowly, her mind racing. She thought about the lessons of her parents and the stories of danger they had told her. And yet she could not forget the pain she had seen, the fear in Tom's eyes, and the trust he had placed in her, even without knowing her. For the first time, Aisha realized that the world might not be as simple as she had been taught. There was kindness and there was danger, but the two were not always connected to the labels she had learned to fear. That night, Aisha could hardly sleep. Her mind kept returning to Tom, to the strange bond they had formed in just a few hours, and to the questions that began to surface in her heart. Could she trust people she did not know? Could she see the world beyond fear? She had been raised to believe that white men were dangerous, that they could not be trusted, and yet the man she had helped was not a threat. He was hurt, scared, and human. The realization unsettled her, but it also opened a small door of possibility, a door to understanding, compassion, and a different way of seeing people. Over the next few days, Aisha continued her work at the inn, but she felt changed. She noticed people differently, observing kindness and struggles in a way she had not before. She smiled more freely, helped strangers without second thoughts, and even allowed herself to imagine a world where people were not judged by their appearance or background. The encounter with Tom had left a deep impression, one that she could not ignore. She knew that her journey was only beginning, and that the lessons of the trail would continue to shape her in ways she could not yet predict. In the following weeks, news came that Tom had survived and was recovering in a nearby town. Aisha felt a mix of relief and curiosity. She realized that meeting him had not only changed his life, but had also changed hers. She had faced fear, acted with courage, and discovered a truth that no story or warning could have taught her, that human beings could be trusted, could be kind, and could need help, regardless of who they were. Aisha began to reflect more deeply on her upbringing. She realized that, while her parents had tried to protect her, their fears had also limited her understanding of the world. She began to see that learning from personal experience, observing people directly, and listening to her own heart were just as important as the lessons she had inherited. The encounter with Tom became a quiet turning point, a moment when she realized that life could not be reduced to fear or prejudice. Though she could not yet know what the future held, Aisha felt a sense of readiness, a willingness to face life with more openness and courage. The trail where she had found Tom, the pain she had witnessed, and the trust she had offered had all left a lasting mark on her spirit. It was a beginning, a first step toward understanding people not as stereotypes, but as individuals with their own stories, struggles, and humanity. And so, life continued in the quiet rural town, but Aisha herself had changed. The world that had seemed distant and frightening now felt a little closer, a little more real. She had discovered that even in fear there could be bravery, even in caution there could be compassion, and even in the lessons of the past there could be room for new understanding. She carried these lessons silently, knowing that one day they would guide her through challenges she could not yet imagine. After the incident on the trail, Aisha could not stop thinking about Tom. Though she had returned to her routine at the inn, the memory of his pain, his voice, and the moment she had lifted him from the rocky ground stayed with her. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the fear in his eyes, and every time she walked past the hills near the town, she remembered the trail where she had acted without hesitation. It was strange to feel so strongly about someone she had barely known, someone who, by every rule she had learned as a child, she might have been afraid of. Days passed, and Aisha went about her work, yet she noticed herself changing in small ways. She smiled more freely at the townspeople, helped travelers without second thoughts, and found herself talking to strangers in the market, learning their stories and struggles. Each interaction reminded her of Tom and the lessons she had learned on the trail, that people were not always what she had been taught to fear, and that kindness could exist in unexpected places. The spark of curiosity and trust that had been growing within her now seemed stronger, almost like a gentle fire lighting her way forward. One morning, as Aisha was preparing breakfast at the inn, she heard news from a passerby. Tom had been released from the hospital and was staying at a ranch just outside the town. The man who delivered the news spoke of Tom with respect and admiration, describing him as brave, hardworking, and resilient. Aisha felt a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Should she visit him? Could she risk opening her heart to someone who was, by all appearances, very different from her? She felt the old fears rise, the ones instilled in her since childhood, but this time she also felt something new, a desire to understand, to connect, and to see him for who he truly was. After thinking it over for several days, Aisha decided to visit the ranch. She told herself that she would be careful, that she would observe before speaking, and that she would remember the lessons of her upbringing. Yet, deep down, she hoped to see the man she had helped, to know more about the person who had trusted her when he was in pain. She walked along the dusty road leading to the ranch, her heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. The sun was bright, casting warm light across the fields, and the air carried the scent of horses, hay, and earth. Each step felt heavy with expectation, yet light with the possibility of discovery. When she arrived, she saw Tom sitting on a wooden bench outside the ranch house. He looked older than she had remembered, his face sunburned and his hands rough from work, but there was a calmness in his eyes. He looked up as she approached and gave a small, welcoming smile. "You came," he said softly. His voice was steady, warm, and full of quiet gratitude. Aisha nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I wanted to see how you were doing," she replied, unsure if her voice would carry all the feelings she had kept hidden inside. Tom gestured for her to sit beside him. As she did, the wind moved gently through the trees, and the sound of horses in the distance created a peaceful background. For a few moments, neither spoke, simply observing the world around them. Aisha noticed the scars on his arms, the slight limp in his step, and the quiet strength in the way he held himself. She realized that he had been through much more than she had known, and yet he carried himself with dignity and resilience. Her admiration for him grew, and with it came a sense of connection she had never expected. Slowly, they began to talk. Tom shared stories of his life on the ranch, the long days of work, the challenges he faced with the land, and the animals he cared for. He spoke openly and honestly without judgment, and Aisha found herself listening with rapt attention. She asked questions, curious about his world, and he answered with patience and warmth. For the first time, she felt that she could speak freely with someone who truly listened, who did not judge her for her past or her upbringing. As the hours passed, Aisha felt a strange mixture of emotions. She felt admiration for Tom's strength, compassion for his struggles, and a growing understanding that the world was more complicated than she had ever imagined. She realized that the lessons of fear and caution she had learned as a child were not wrong. They had protected her, but they were incomplete. There was another truth to discover, that trust, empathy, and connection could exist even in the most unlikely circumstances. Tom noticed the change in her demeanor. "You're different now," he said gently. "I can see it in the way you carry yourself, the way you look at the world." Aisha paused, unsure how to respond. She had never spoken about her childhood fears and the lessons she had learned, but in that quiet moment she felt a desire to share. I was taught to be careful, to mistrust people like you," she admitted softly. "But something changed when I found you. I realized that people are not always what they seem, and that kindness can be found anywhere. Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes. Life has a way of teaching us what books and stories cannot. Sometimes we have to experience it ourselves to truly understand. Aisha felt a deep resonance in his words. She realized that her own journey of understanding, courage, and compassion was just beginning. The encounter with Tom had opened her eyes to the possibilities of human connection, to the importance of seeing people as individuals rather than labels. In the days that followed, Aisha continued to visit the ranch. She helped with chores, fed the animals, and learned how to care for the land. Tom taught her patiently, showing her how to handle the horses, how to mend fences, and how to read the weather. Each task was a lesson not only in practical skills, but also in trust, patience, and resilience. Aisha felt herself growing stronger, more confident, and more open to the world. She noticed that her fears, though still present, no longer controlled her. She was learning to navigate life with both caution and courage. During these visits, Aisha and Tom shared stories of their pasts. She told him about her village, her family, and the lessons she had grown up with. He listened without judgment, offering gentle insights and encouragement. He spoke of his own life, the hardships he had faced, and the people he had met along the way. Their conversations were honest, sometimes quiet, sometimes filled with laughter, but always filled with understanding. Aisha began to see that human connection was not about agreement or similarity, but about empathy, respect, and shared experience. One afternoon, as they rested under a large oak tree, Tom asked Aisha a question that surprised her. "Do you ever wonder what life would be like if you had never left your village?" She nodded thoughtfully. "All the time," she admitted. "I love my home, but I had to see the world for myself. I had to understand people, not just the stories I was told as a child." Tom smiled. "And now you have. You've seen that the world is bigger than fear and warnings. You've learned that trust and kindness exist, even in unexpected places." Aisha felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of validation, and a quiet joy that she had not known before. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. It was not a bond of romance at first, but one of trust, respect, and shared humanity. Aisha learned that people could surprise her, that kindness could come from unexpected places, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Tom, in turn, learned to see the world through her eyes, understanding the weight of her upbringing and the strength it took for her to overcome the lessons of fear. Together, they navigated the delicate balance between caution and trust, discovery and understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Aisha realized how much she had changed since that first day on the trail. She no longer saw the world as simply dangerous or safe, black or white. She saw it in shades of gray, filled with complexity, humanity, and possibility. She understood that every person carried their own story, struggles, and experiences, and that it was only through empathy and connection that one could truly see them. Aisha also realized that her journey was far from over. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But she felt ready to face them with a new perspective, one that balanced caution with courage, fear with hope, and inherited lessons with personal experience. She had learned that life was not about following every rule she had been taught, nor blindly trusting every stranger. It was about observing, listening, acting with compassion, and being willing to grow. And in that quiet, beautiful evening at the ranch, Aisha felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had faced fear, acted with courage, and discovered a truth that no story or warning could have taught her. She had found that human beings could be trusted, could be kind, and could need help, regardless of who they were. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this understanding would guide her through every challenge and encounter yet to come. In the weeks that followed, Aisha continued her visits to the ranch. Each visit felt like stepping into a new world, a world that was different from her village, different from the small town she had first moved to, and yet full of familiarity in its quiet rhythms. The days were filled with work, laughter, and small discoveries. She learned to feed the horses, repair fences, and even ride under Tom's careful guidance. What had started as cautious curiosity now blossomed into a sense of belonging. She felt useful, capable, and most surprisingly at home in this unfamiliar place. Tom's injuries had healed enough for him to walk without much pain, but there were still moments when he needed Aisha's help. Sometimes it was practical, like carrying buckets of water or tending to a wound. Other times it was more subtle, like lifting his spirits after a long day of work or listening quietly when he needed to speak. Aisha began to see that helping someone was not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about showing up, staying patient, and being present. And with each act she felt herself changing. She was becoming more compassionate, more understanding, and more aware of her own strengths. During these quiet afternoons, Aisha began to learn more about Tom's life. He shared stories about growing up on the ranch, about his family, and the hardships of life in the countryside. He spoke of storms that had destroyed fences, of animals lost to illness, and of days when the work seemed endless. He spoke openly and honestly, without complaining, and Aisha admired his resilience. She realized that strength was not only physical but also emotional, the ability to face challenges without giving up, the ability to remain kind and hopeful even when life was difficult. Aisha, in turn, shared parts of her own life. She spoke about her village, her parents, and the strict lessons she had grown up with. She told Tom about the stories that had shaped her, the warnings she had been given, and the fears she had carried for so long. Speaking aloud brought a strange sense of relief. For the first time, she was not judged for her past, nor was she dismissed. Tom listened carefully, offering gentle encouragement and sometimes simply nodding in understanding. His acceptance gave her the courage to examine her own beliefs, to question the lessons she had inherited, and to open her heart to new possibilities. One afternoon, as they were repairing a fence together, a sudden rainstorm swept across the fields. The sky darkened quickly, and heavy drops began to fall. They hurried to a small barn for shelter, laughing as they ran, the rain soaking their clothes and hair. Inside, they worked to secure the animals and cover supplies, their movements coordinated and efficient. In those moments, Aisha noticed something profound. The storm had brought them together, forcing them to rely on one another, and in that shared effort, a deeper bond was forming. It was a bond built not on words alone, but on trust, cooperation, and the simple act of being present for one another. As the weeks turned into months, Aisha found herself thinking less about fear and more about possibilities. She began to notice the small moments of beauty in everyday life. The way the sun filtered through the barn's wooden slats, the gentle nickering of a horse, the smell of fresh hay after rain, and the quiet laughter shared over simple tasks. These moments, once invisible to her, now seemed full of meaning. They reminded her that life was not just about surviving or following rules, but about noticing, appreciating, and participating in the world around her. One evening, after a long day of work, Aisha and Tom sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the air was filled with the faint scent of wildflowers and earth. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, each lost in their thoughts. Then Tom spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "You've changed," he said. "I can see it in the way you look at the world, the way you move, the way you help others." Aisha looked at him, surprised by the observation. She had felt the changes within herself, but hearing it from someone else made it real. "I think you've changed me," she replied softly. "You showed me that trust is possible, that kindness exists even in unexpected places, and that fear doesn't have to control everything." Tom smiled, a gentle warmth in his eyes. "We change each other without even realizing it sometimes," he said. "Life has a way of teaching us lessons through the people we meet and the experiences we share." Aisha nodded, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude for everything that had happened since the day she found him on the trail. Their conversations grew deeper over time. They talked about hopes, dreams, and regrets. Tom shared his fears of losing the ranch, of failing those who depended on him, and of living a life without connection. Aisha spoke of her desire to explore the world, to understand people, and to live without being constrained by fear. Through these conversations, they both realized that life was not simply about survival or success, but about connection, empathy, and understanding. Each shared story, each moment of vulnerability, brought them closer together, creating a bond that was honest, meaningful, and lasting. Aisha also began to notice changes in herself that went beyond her feelings for Tom. She found herself more confident in her actions, more willing to take risks, and more open to seeing the good in others. She noticed how her fears, though still present, no longer dictated her every decision. She was learning to balance caution with courage, skepticism with trust, and inherited beliefs with personal experience. The lessons she had learned on the trail and at the ranch were becoming part of her, shaping the woman she was becoming. One day, while tending to the horses, Aisha realized just how far she had come. She had learned to ride confidently, to care for the animals, and to handle challenges without panic. She had also learned to listen, to observe, and to act with compassion. She remembered the girl who had hesitated on the trail, the girl who had been weighed down by fear and mistrust, and she realized that she was no longer that person. She had grown, not just physically or practically, but emotionally and spiritually. She had discovered a strength she had not known existed within her. During this time, Tom faced his own challenges. The ranch required constant care, and there were days when the work seemed endless. But with Aisha by his side, he felt supported, less burdened, and more capable of facing difficulties. He noticed how her presence brought calm and efficiency, how her care and insight improved life at the ranch, and how her growing confidence mirrored his own resilience. They learned from one another, drawing strength from shared effort and mutual respect. As the seasons began to change, so did their bond. It deepened into something profound, built on trust, shared experience, and mutual growth. They laughed together, worked together, and faced the challenges of life side by side. For Aisha, this period was a revelation. She realized that life was not just about following the rules she had been taught or avoiding danger. It was about connection, compassion, courage, and the willingness to grow beyond fear. One quiet evening, after the sun had set and the stars had begun to shine, Aisha reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She remembered the trail where she had first found Tom, the fear she had felt, and the courage she had summoned. She remembered the lessons of her childhood, the warnings, and the stories. And she realized that while those lessons had shaped her, they no longer defined her. She was learning to create her own path, guided by empathy, courage, and understanding. And so, life continued at the ranch. Aisha and Tom worked together, learned from one another, and grew as individuals and as companions. They faced hardships, celebrated victories, and discovered the power of trust and compassion. Aisha had transformed from a cautious girl shaped by fear into a young woman capable of empathy, courage, and connection. The encounter that had seemed so small, the day she found a man injured on a trail, had blossomed into a journey of self-discovery, understanding, and transformation. Through it all, Aisha realized that life was not about avoiding fear or blindly following rules. It was about learning, experiencing, and growing. It was about facing challenges, helping others, and discovering the depth of human connection. And as she looked out over the fields, watching the sun set in a sky full of colors, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She had faced fear, acted with courage, and discovered truths that no story or warning could have taught her. And she knew that these lessons would guide her through every challenge and encounter yet to come. The months passed quickly, and Aisha had grown into a woman who saw the world differently. Life at the ranch had taught her lessons that went far beyond caring for horses or repairing fences. She had learned about patience, trust, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from helping others. Each day had added a new layer to her understanding, and she now recognized the limits of the fears she had carried since childhood. Her heart was no longer bound by prejudice or mistrust, but open to compassion, understanding, and connection. Tom had fully recovered from his injuries, but he remained at the ranch, enjoying her company and learning from the changes he had seen in her. Together, they faced the responsibilities of the ranch. The work was hard, but it felt lighter when shared. They celebrated small victories, like a calf born safely or a fence repaired after a storm. They also faced setbacks, like equipment breaking or the weather turning unexpectedly harsh. Through it all, Aisha found strength she had not known she possessed. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it, and that compassion was a choice that required attention, patience, and heart. One morning, Aisha was walking along the edge of the fields when she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the trail where she had first found Tom, injured and in pain. She remembered the fear that had gripped her heart, the warnings her parents had given her, and the hesitation she had felt. And she remembered the moment she had chosen to act, to step forward, and to help a stranger. That moment, small as it had seemed at the time, had set in motion a chain of events that had changed her life completely. It had opened her eyes to the power of trust, empathy, and courage. Aisha thought about how far she had come. She had been raised to believe that people who were different from her, especially white men, could not be trusted. She had been taught caution, fear, and suspicion. But through her experience with Tom, she had discovered a truth that no warning or story could convey. People could surprise you with their kindness, honesty, and humanity. She had learned that understanding comes from experience, not just from what one is taught. And she had learned that growth often requires stepping beyond fear and acting with a compassionate heart. Tom approached her quietly, carrying a bucket of water for the animals. He smiled when he saw her lost in thought. "You've been quiet," he said gently. Aisha smiled back, feeling the warmth of the bond they had formed. "I've been thinking about how much has changed since that day on the trail," she replied. "It feels like a lifetime ago, and yet that day started everything." Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It did. And look at where we are now. You've grown so much, and the world looks different to you because of your courage." Their friendship, rooted in trust and compassion, had grown into something even deeper. It was a bond of mutual respect and shared experience. Aisha had learned to trust herself, to act decisively, and to see the good in others. Tom had learned patience, understanding, and the importance of empathy in forming genuine connections. Together, they had created a space where kindness and respect guided their actions, a space where they could be themselves without judgment or fear. As the seasons changed, Aisha began to think about her future. She realized that life could no longer be defined by the fears of her past. She wanted to explore, to learn, and to experience the world beyond the ranch. But she also knew that she could carry the lessons of courage, compassion, and trust wherever she went. She thought about her village, her parents, and the small, dusty paths where her life had begun. She realized that she could honor those roots while still creating a life shaped by her own choices, experiences, and understanding. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Aisha and Tom sat together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The air was calm, the animals settled in their stalls, and the quiet of the countryside surrounded them. Aisha felt a sense of completion, as though the journey she had begun months ago had brought her to a place of understanding and peace. She realized that fear no longer dictated her actions, that she could trust people, and that compassion could guide her life. Tom looked at her with a gentle smile. "You've changed everything about the way you see the world," he said, "not just for yourself, but for the people around you." Aisha nodded, feeling the truth in his words. "I've learned that life is not about avoiding fear or following every rule we're taught," she said. "It's about understanding, acting with courage, and seeing people for who they really are. That's what matters." Tom reached out and placed a hand on hers, a gesture of friendship, respect, and shared experience. In the days that followed, Aisha continued to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the girl she had been, cautious, fearful, and bound by the lessons of her parents, and she marveled at the strength she had discovered within herself. She realized that growth often comes through experience, challenge, and connection, and that even the smallest acts of kindness can have a profound impact. The moment she had found Tom on the trail had not only saved a life, but had also transformed her own. Aisha also began to think about the impact she could have on others. She wanted to share the lessons she had learned, to help others see that fear and prejudice could be overcome, and that compassion, empathy, and courage could guide one's life. She realized that personal growth was not just for oneself, it could inspire change in the world around her. By living with openness, understanding, and kindness, she could demonstrate the power of human connection and the importance of acting with a compassionate heart. One afternoon, a neighbor's child wandered near the ranch, curious about the animals. Aisha greeted the child warmly, showing him how to feed the horses and care for the small animals. She explained the importance of patience, respect, and gentle care. Watching the child learn, she realized how much she had changed. She no longer acted out of fear or caution alone, but out of understanding, empathy, and a desire to help others grow. The lessons of her childhood had been transformed, reshaped by experience, and now guided her in a new, positive way. Tom watched her interact with the child, smiling quietly. He realized that Aisha's transformation was complete, not in a dramatic way, but in the subtle, meaningful ways that mattered most. She had learned to see beyond fear, to act with compassion, and to trust in the goodness of people. She had discovered a strength that came from experience, understanding, and connection. And she had learned that life was richer, fuller, and more meaningful when one acted with both courage and empathy. As the story of their lives continued, Aisha knew that she could never forget the day she had found Tom on the trail. That moment had been the beginning of a journey that had reshaped her beliefs, her heart, and her understanding of the world. It had shown her that trust, compassion, and courage were not abstract concepts, but real forces that could change lives, her own and the lives of those around her. She felt gratitude for that moment, for the lessons it had taught her, and for the person it had helped her become. Aisha's life continued at the ranch, filled with work, learning, laughter, and quiet reflection. She had grown into a woman who could face fear without being controlled by it, who could trust without ignoring caution, and who could act with compassion even when it required courage. She had learned that the world was neither entirely safe nor entirely dangerous, but a place where understanding, empathy, and human connection could guide one's journey. And in that understanding, Aisha found peace. She had been raised with fear, caution, and mistrust, but she had chosen a different path, a path of compassion, courage, and connection. She had discovered that people were more than the labels or prejudices they carried, and that kindness and understanding could bridge even the deepest divides. The journey that had begun with a single act of courage on a lonely trail had transformed her life completely, opening her heart to the beauty, complexity, and possibility of the human experience. Aisha looked out over the fields one last time that evening, feeling the wind on her face and the warmth of the sun fading behind the hills. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, hardships, and unexpected moments. But she also knew that she was ready. Ready to face the world with courage, to act with compassion, and to see people for who they truly were. She had been changed forever by a simple act of kindness, by a moment of trust, and by the understanding that the human heart could grow stronger, wiser, and more open through experience. And with that realization, Aisha smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude, peace, and hope. She had walked a long road from fear to understanding, from caution to compassion, and from isolation to connection. The story of the girl raised to hate had ended, replaced by the story of a woman who had learned that trust, courage, and empathy could guide her life, and that even the smallest acts of kindness could create profound and lasting change.